Attorney Stella Johnson was among the first to meet Mark Wilson, introduced by the head of G. Schenectady's administrative offices. At first sight of the tall, exceptionally handsome executive, Stella felt a personal attraction, which she had to suppress with her professional demeanor. She knew she had to work with him and was not the type to fawn over a man or openly flirt. Mark Wilson had recently joined as the chief of the real estate tax division at G. Schenectady. Stella, a senior associate attorney in the corporate counsel's office, worked separately from the real property group, although both offices were connected within the company. Mark wasn't her superior, nor was he directly above her in the corporate hierarchy. However, he was a rising star with evident potential for significant advancement. His charisma and striking looks made a notable impact on the female staff, ranging from production plants to executive suites. The primarily female legal division, including both clerical and professional staff, felt his presence keenly. Initially, Stella largely ignored the whispers and speculations among her female colleagues, maintaining her professional distance. Although she couldn't deny her own interest in Mark, she resisted indulging in office gossip. Stories of his reputed bedroom prowess and physical attributes piqued her curiosity despite her resolve. Observing her female co-workers and her secretary, Nora Scott, openly flirt with Mark, Stella refused to engage in what she considered frivolous behavior. She was, after all, a married attorney with a clear path ahead of her. Stella and her husband, Andrew, lived in a quaint colonial house in Delmar, close to an elementary school, as they planned to start a family. Stella had meticulously saved for the eventuality of children. She was a planner, and every stage of her life was carefully prepared for. Some may have thought her marriage to Andrew, right after college and before law school, was rushed, but it was part of a well-thought-out strategy. While Stella attended law school, Andrew began teaching middle school science, putting off his dream of becoming a marine biologist. He had envisioned a life on a boat in a warmer climate, a romantic dream that endeared him to his pragmatic wife. As their married life unfolded, Andrew found enjoyment in teaching and began attending graduate school in the evenings and during the summers. With their combined incomes, they were well prepared for parenthood. Andrew's dream of a life at sea remained just that, a dream anchored on the banks of the upper Hudson River. Their dog, Buster, was the only unexpected element in Stella's otherwise orderly life. A rescue pup, Buster came into their home after Andrew took his class on a school trip to the animal shelter. At the shelter, Andrew found a forlorn little pup that seemed too ungainly and unattractive to be easily adopted. Ever the romantic, Andrew couldn't resist the charm of the puppy's big brown eyes. Overlooking its awkward and homely appearance, an Irish wolfhound and St. Bernard mix, he named the pup Buster and brought him home. Initially, Stella had doubts about this addition to their small household, but it seemed a small concession for the loss of Andrew's bigger dreams. As Buster grew, he morphed into a large, ungainly dog that intimidated visitors at first glance. However, his affectionate nature quickly became evident. He was a gentle giant whose biggest threat was his enthusiastic licking. Stella grew to love Buster almost as much as she loved Andrew. Both her husband and the dog were big, lovable creatures who appeared fierce, but were tender and beautiful inside. Stella had a house, a dog, and a contented marriage with the promise of children on the horizon. That was until Mark Wilson entered the picture. She was exactly his type, a pretty woman maturing into greater beauty, still carrying the shyness and innocence of her youth. Her reserved demeanor made her all the more desirable to a man used to easy conquests. One afternoon, Mark entered Stella's office and announced, "We need to address these triple net leases in the town of Colony." He moved around her desk, positioning himself uncomfortably close, with one arm over the back of her chair and the other pointing to a spreadsheet on her desk. The GE Real Property Division had a strong track record in disputing property taxes, but Colony, known for its extensive commercial expansion since the 1960s, was a formidable adversary. "What do you propose?" Stella asked, turning in her chair, which placed her practically between his arms. She could feel his body's warmth and an almost magnetic pull. I thought we should invoke the rights assigned to us under the leases and file in rem proceedings on the property assessments. All of them, she questioned. Looking directly into her eyes, he responded, yes, all of them. I never like leaving anything unfinished. His words carried a double meaning that stirred an exhilarating yet frightening excitement within her. She could feel that Mark was talking about more than just the leases. That's a big undertaking. You should know there's a strong defense, Stella cautioned. I find that a robust offense can always overcome a defense, Mark countered. With that, Stella began working alongside Mark on the tax cases. He hired independent appraisers and initiated the tax protests, while Stella prepared the in rem petitions. In rem meant against the thing in Latin, referring to cases dealing with real property. These actions involved no defendant directly, only a request for the court to review the property assessment. The town stood firm on its assessments, which were almost always inflated to 150% of the actual property value, instead of adhering to the law-required actual value. This stubbornness meant Stella had a mountain of work preparing the cases for trial. Mark's hands-on approach required him to have frequent contact with her. He wasn't exaggerating about mounting a significant offense, both in their legal battles and in his pursuit of Stella. She struggled to resist, despite her deep-seated desire to surrender to him from the very first approach. Stella was a normal woman with all the desires that entailed, further complicated by her own inexperience. Stella had been intimate with no man other than her husband. Andrew was her first, as she was his. In her mind, they were committed to remaining faithful to each other until death parted them. Yet she couldn't help but wonder what being with another man would be like. She was certain that Mark would be extraordinary in bed. Several women in her office, including her secretary Nora, had allegedly experienced this firsthand. Nora had even had a 2-month affair with Mark, and often boasted about it, ending their liaison only when her husband became suspicious and intolerant. Stella wasn't like Nora. Though her husband, Andrew, was not the jealous type, his trust and unconditional love made it even more difficult for her to betray him. She was not a cheater and wouldn't go behind Andrew's back, but the pull towards Mark was strong, and deep down, she knew she didn't want to resist. Andrew wasn't lacking in the bedroom, but he was ordinary. Above average in height, less than average in looks, and average in other aspects that mattered. If judged by character, Andrew was a prince, her prince. From their first meeting in freshman biology, they had just clicked on so many levels. She truly loved Andrew, but there was something about Mark that made him nearly impossible to resist. True to his word, Mark launched a determined offensive. He flirted shamelessly, complimenting Stella on her hair, shoes, dress, and any bit of jewelry or flair she wore. If Stella were being honest, she would have recognized that ever since Mark's first appearance at the GE offices, her wardrobe had undergone a noticeable shift. She had ceased wearing pants to work, opting instead for pinstriped lawyers' suit jackets matched with skirts that grew tighter and shorter with each passing season. Everything about her began to change, from wearing her hair down instead of up, to swapping guerlain for channel, to replacing pantyhose with stockings that had lacy tops. Outwardly, Stella, the buttoned-up lawyer, resisted, but the sensual woman within her was itching to break free. Mark Wilson knew exactly how to untie a woman's laces. He suggested working lunches but off campus, so they could focus without interruption. A drink after work soon followed these lunches. "Just one," he said. "You've earned it." One drink led to late returns home. Initially, Andrew greeted her with their dog, Buster, but as summer turned to fall, Andrew was often absent, working on his boat. During his first summer teaching, he had bought a small sunfish and learned to sail on Lake George. Eventually, he took up a summer job at the Albany Yacht Club, earning little more than minimum wage. Stella reasoned that it kept a part of his dreams alive and contributed to their baby fund for starting a family. Stella couldn't exactly blame Andrew for being gone when she was often late herself, but Buster was always there to greet her with a quizzical, or perhaps accusatory, look. If Buster sensed her inner conflict and how precariously she was treading, he couldn't express it. If Andrew suspected anything, he pretended not to notice. Tensions were clearly building towards a crescendo as the long New York winter set in, marked by an October ice storm. Andrew had been having what he would describe as an off day. It wasn't that he hated teaching, he actually enjoyed the challenge. Teaching is a far more difficult profession than people realize. There's an overwhelming amount of small-scale politics. One has to filter through the bureaucracy imposed by school administrators to get the job done despite them. Then there are the machinations of fellow teachers, their complaints and personal grudges, which one must navigate carefully. And lastly, there are the parents who are either overly involved in or indifferent to their children's lives. There's hardly ever a happy medium. And then there is the teaching itself. Andrew taught 3 classes of 9th grade general science, averaging 26 students per class, totaling 78 students. Year after year, they paraded through his class, largely ignorant of the physical world and preoccupied with who was dating whom, their favorite pop star or rapper's antics, and most importantly, how they looked and were perceived by their peers. He would be the first to acknowledge he had it easier than the English, math, or, God forbid, social studies teachers. Science, after all, could captivate a student's interest, especially if you kicked off a class with a small explosion. Grabbing their attention was easy. Keeping it was the real challenge. In that regard, his job was perhaps the hardest, conveying the fundamental laws of the universe to the future builders and shapers of society. He recognized the peril that societal ignorance of science could pose. His responsibility was compounded by administrators, parents, politicians, religious leaders, and a profoundly uninformed society that saw his role merely as prepping students to pass standardized tests crafted by the foolish for the ignorant. It was a job easy to despise, but one Andrew had come to embrace. Yet he found himself increasingly dreading a future confined to the classroom. He yearned for his lost dreams and sailed his little boat on the cold Hudson whenever the weather allowed. Unfortunately, the weather was abysmal that October day. Layers of cold and moisture in the atmosphere produced neither rain nor snow, but sheets of ice that blanketed the roads, trees, and utility lines. By noon, an emergency declaration had closed schools and most businesses. Andrew knew Stella's Audi was no match for these conditions, so he drove his old diesel Ford pickup to pick her up. Her Audi could stay in the company lot overnight. He would ensure she got home safely and back to work the next day. Andrew arrived at the GE campus in Schenectady mid-afternoon, expecting to have to drag Stella out of her office early. To his surprise, the GE parking lots were already nearly empty, and he spotted Stella exiting her building. But she wasn't alone. A tall man walked beside her, holding an umbrella in one hand, while his other arm was wrapped around Stella's waist. Their movements spoke of a familiarity that hinted at more than just 2 co-workers sharing an umbrella. It's akin to observing a student struggling in a course. They put in the effort, but the lesson's essence eludes them. One moment, they are in the dark, and the next, their eyes light up with understanding. Perhaps it's something the teacher does or says, but often the insight simply clicks, a moment where all the disparate threads converge. Andrew had such a moment, but this time, he wasn't the teacher, Stella was. As she crossed a patch of icy pavement, Stella leaned into the stranger, resting her head on his chest and wrapping her arm firmly around him. It might have seemed like a prudent move to avoid a fall, but her actions were far too natural, too comfortable. There was no hesitation. She was a married woman clinging to a man who was not her husband, and she showed no awkwardness or unease. At that moment, Andrew understood the meaning behind all the little signs he had seen but not recognized until that instant. The way Stella had been dressing for work, her vague, distracted manner at home for months, and her frequent, consistent lateness in getting home. It should have been obvious before, but he had been unsuspecting, naive, and blinded by love. His first inclination was to drive away, but that wasn't who he was. He turned his truck and gently pressed the gas pedal, maneuvering between the couple under the umbrella and the entrance to the parking lot. Stella and the man looked up as the truck blocked their path. The man appeared ready to curse Andrew out, but before he could, Andrew rolled down the window and leaned out. "Thought my wife could use a lift home," Andrew said. The man swallowed whatever expletives he was about to utter. Stella stood frozen, her mouth agape. Andrew leaned out the truck's window into the freezing rain and locked eyes with his wife. "Get in," he commanded. There was a jagged menace in his voice. Stella extracted herself from the man's embrace and scurried around the truck to the passenger side. As she climbed in, Andrew stared hard at her companion, who attempted an awkward smile. Once Stella was securely in the vehicle, Andrew nodded to the man and put the truck into drive. The journey to their Delmore house, usually a 30-minute drive, stretched to over an hour due to the inclement weather. Yet it felt much longer to the truck's occupants. They traveled in silence until they reached the bypass in the town of Bethlehem. Moments from home, Andrew broke the silence, poking the beehive. "Were you ever going to tell me about him?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Stella continued staring out the passenger window, not turning to face him. She considered denial, but realized she had nothing to deny. "No, because there's nothing to tell," she said. "Mark is a coworker. I like him, and he likes me." "You get that close to all your work friends?" "No, of course not," Stella said, pausing a moment before continuing. "Mark is something special to me. We are close in a way that is more than simple friendship." As his Ford truck turned up Delaware Avenue toward Delmore Place and their little 3-bedroom colonial house, Andrew contemplated his wife's statement. "Just how far has this friendship gone with Mr. Umbrella?" he asked. "His name is Mark Wilson. He works in the real property office." "So he's just a co-worker then," Andrew said, his words dripping with sarcasm, making it clear he didn't believe her. By the time they reached their driveway and the side door to their home, Stella had already decided against responding to Andrew's accusation. She quickly hopped out and rushed the few feet into the house. Andrew pulled his truck into the garage, then trailed behind her, entering the kitchen just as Stella disappeared upstairs into the master bedroom. Buster, their loyal canine, waited just inside the kitchen door, eager for his walk despite the inclement weather. Andrew clipped on Buster's leash, and the two braved the icy rain, heading to the elementary school and its deserted playing fields. The cold and wet didn't seem to faze Buster, a dog built for adversity. Soaked by the time they returned, Andrew and Buster descended through the side door into the basement. Andrew threw his wet clothes into the wash and retrieved clean ones from the dryer. Buster shook himself dry, but Andrew helped with an old beach towel kept for that very purpose. When they ascended back to the kitchen, they found Stella waiting at the table, wrapped in a terry cloth robe with an open bottle of wine before her. "We need to talk," she declared, pouring wine into 2 glasses. Andrew took a seat at the table, positioning himself at the end so Stella had to turn to meet his gaze, allowing him to turn away when he needed to. Stella's tone was sweet yet firm. "I want you to know that I love you and am very happy in our marriage," she began. "But while nothing romantic has happened with Mark, it's fair to say we have a strong attraction to each other." "And what is that supposed to mean?" Andrew asked, feeling his anger rise. It was fueled by more than pure jealousy. There was a deep sense of betrayal. Stella was his only love, his first and only relationship. She had filled a void in his life, bringing a sense of fulfillment and togetherness. As she spoke again, her measured words reminded Andrew of her profession as a lawyer, someone adept at molding language to her purpose. "It means that we have a strong marriage, and I'm totally committed to it," Stella stated. "I love you, but I'm no more able to control my every desire than you are. I am a woman with all the physical limitations inherent in my gender. We can't help who we are attracted to. I have known no other man but you. That I'm tempted by Mark is a fact. I can't deny it." "And," Andrew pressed, "there's more, so just say it." Stella sighed heavily. "This isn't easy. I've thought about it a lot, and I need to get Mark Wilson out of my system. It's too difficult working with him every day and not knowing what it would be like." "What it would be like?" Andrew prompted. "You're the only man I've ever been with. He's supposed to be amazing. I can't help but be curious, and he's made it clear that he wants me. Yet I haven't even kissed him, and I won't unless." She let the last word linger, but Andrew had already turned away. As she finished speaking, he rose and said, "Buster needs feeding." Stella let the matter drop, caught between the love she felt for her husband and her desires. 3 weeks had passed since the ice storm. The weather had shifted into an unusually warm November, reflecting the unpredictable climate patterns. A late-season hurricane was brewing in the Caribbean, but between Stella and Andrew, the emotional climate was a hard freeze. They had barely spoken since Stella's monologue at the kitchen table. Upon returning to work after the storm, Mark immediately inquired about what happened with Andrew. "He wasn't violent, was he?" Mark asked. "No, he was shocked, I guess, and definitely hurt," she replied. "He's not a violent man." "Well, it seemed to me that he had murder in his eyes," Mark claimed. "No, he's just hurt." "I hurt him," Stella said, walking away. Mark wasn't a physically brave man, and Andrew's demeanor belied his mild temperament. This was unlike Nora Scott's husband Ryan, whose small stature and slight build hid a violent temper. Thanksgiving came and went, and soon Christmas was approaching, marked by the office holiday party. It was a small, alcohol-free affair, but everyone made an appearance, even if briefly. By that December, Mark had already been with the majority of the attractive women at GE Schenectady. None of them had complained. The only conquest that had eluded him so far was Stella, but the game wasn't over yet. Since Andrew's unfortunate and untimely appearance in October, Stella had kept her distance. However, as time passed, the situation began to look promising again. Mark managed to catch Stella just outside her office as the party started winding down. The next thing she knew, they were in her office with the door closed, passionately making out. "I can't," she said, pulling away. "Why?" "You said your husband wouldn't give us trouble." "It's still cheating. I owe Andrew better than that." "And what do you owe yourself?" Mark challenged. "You know what you want. You can't deny this." Mark pulled her into a tight embrace and kissed her. Despite her efforts to resist, she found herself responding with the intensity of her barely contained passion. It took all her willpower to break away. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "And we're running out of time," Mark said, frustration evident in his voice. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'm being promoted to the New York City headquarters. I'll be leaving at the end of January." "They haven't announced that yet," Stella said, surprised. "It won't be official until the first of the year, but they've told me to get ready to move." He kissed her again, but Stella continued to resist him. On her way home, Stella mulled over her situation. She desired Mark, but not for the long term. His departure seemed like a relief, yet it also felt like she was about to miss out on an experience she might never have again. She loved her husband, Andrew, and wanted to build a home and family with him. However, suddenly, the idea of motherhood felt like an impending trap, closing in on her before she had fully experienced life. Mark's question echoed in her mind. Didn't she owe herself this experience before she settled down? If she missed this chance to be with someone like Mark Wilson, it might never come again. By the time she pulled into the driveway, Stella had convinced herself that she needed to be with Mark at least once before he left for New York. But she wasn't going to cheat. She would talk to Andrew and explain that she wanted this one opportunity to experience something different. Mark's imminent departure would make it easier. It would be a one-time thing, after which he would be gone, and she and Andrew could return to their comfortable life together, enriched by her new experience. She needed to find the right moment to bring this up with Andrew. She didn't want it to come off as a fait accompli. It should be the starting point of a discussion where they could reach a mutual understanding. In her mind, this was just another conversation where she would articulate her needs and Andrew would acquiesce. Many marriages are not truly equal. One partner tends to dominate. In Stella and Andrew's case, it had always been Stella, and this had rarely caused friction between them. Andrew had so far agreed to everything she wanted in their marriage. However, this particular desire was about to ignite an earthquake that had been building beneath the surface. Stella decided that the best time to bring up her wishes was just after dinner, before they adjourned to their bedroom to make love. Stella chose Sunday evening, right after their office holiday party. She prepared Andrew's favorite pot roast for dinner. After they ate, she took extra care to make herself look attractive while Andrew lounged on the couch, engrossed in one of his nature shows. Around 9 o'clock, she slipped in beside him on the couch. He turned to her, noticing the faint scent of her Chanel perfume. Before he could speak, she kissed him softly on the lips and said, "I want to talk about the issue that's been between us." "Issue?" he asked, puzzled. "My attraction for Mark Wilson," she replied. "You mean Mr. Umbrella?" he said, referring to the man she had mentioned before. "Yes, him. I'm attracted to him," Stella admitted. "What does that mean?" Andrew asked, his confusion turning to concern. "He desires me," she paused, "and I desire him too." She felt his body tense next to hers, and he pulled away. Refusing to be rejected, she leaned back in, pressing her body to his, laying her head on his chest and taking his hands in hers. "It doesn't change how I feel about you," she assured him. "I'll always want you, but right now I want him, and only physically." Andrew gently pushed her away, holding her at arm's length. He made her look him in the eye as he responded, "What are you trying to tell me? Have you slept with him?" Because this isn't something a wife says to her husband unless she's confessing. She smiled softly, maintaining eye contact. "I would never sleep with him without telling you first." "So, you're telling me now?" he asked, his voice filled with tension. "I'm telling you I want to have this brief affair before we start our family. We've been patiently waiting, setting aside money for our future. Now I understand why I've been hesitating." "And why is that?" he asked. "I've never been with another man. I've always been too controlled, too focused on my studies to enjoy college or law school. I just want this one experience before we settle down into what will be a great life, marriage, and family. Just this one brief encounter." "You want to have an affair with Mr. Umbrella?" he nearly shouted. "No," she fired back, "just an encounter. He's getting promoted and will be leaving for the NYC office after the new year. I want just a few days with him before he goes. A weekend and nothing more." "And if I say no?" Andrew asked, although he already knew the answer. "I was hoping you would understand that I need this experience." Without giving Andrew a chance to respond, she kissed him and pressed herself against him. "It's going to be all right," she thought, as they engaged in their familiar dance of love. For Andrew, however, their lovemaking had a bittersweet quality. Something had been irretrievably lost. Stella was the only woman he had ever known intimately, and until moments before, he had expected her to remain the only one. Stella, convinced that the matter was settled, later informed Mark that her first weekend in January would be his. Mark lived in a quiet cul-de-sac in Niskayuna. His home was modest for the neighborhood, a 3-bedroom split level among grander 5-bedroom center hall colonials. As they had arranged, his attached garage was open and ready. Stella parked her Audi beside Mark's sleek Porsche. Mark awaited her in the living room with an open bottle of wine. As she descended from the garage entry to the main floor, he watched her every step, taking in the sight of her short black dress that hugged her body, highlighting the fullness of her breasts and the enticing curve of her hips. His eyes reflected a mixture of lust and anticipation, a stark contrast to the look Andrew had given her when she left just 20 minutes earlier. Andrew's eyes had been filled with sadness, a pain she wished she could have erased. Yet she had assured him this was a one-time thing, a fleeting moment before she dedicated herself to their future. They would have children, and their marriage would be resilient, tested but unwavering, because of a love that could weather even this temporary indiscretion. She truly believed it, convincing herself that this adventure would ultimately fortify their bond. As she stood there, her body tingled with anticipation, her mind buzzing with excitement. Their bodies gravitated towards each other, meeting in an embrace in the center of his living room. Mark kissed her, his arms enveloping her, but then he pulled back and said, "One glass of wine, and then we need to head to dinner. I have tickets for the band's visit at Proctor's Theater." Mark knew how to woo her, dining, wining, and ensuring an unforgettable evening. He reveled in what he saw as his victory, confident in his ability to both give and receive pleasure. "I'm completely in your hands this weekend," Stella assured him. They dined at a romantic Italian restaurant in downtown Schenectady and enjoyed the show at the beautifully restored Vaudeville Theater. They drank sparingly, but when they returned to his home, he opened a bottle of champagne. They toasted to their weekend before heading to the bedroom, where they intended to fulfill the desire that had pulled them together. He undressed her with the care of unwrapping a priceless piece of art, murmuring how beautiful she was as he revealed her skin. She realized that he was savoring her, appreciating her in ways she had never experienced. In his arms, with this incredibly handsome man, she felt truly beautiful. His hands danced over her flesh, sending her desire into overdrive. She pushed his shirt off, revealing the dark blonde hair on his chest, so different from her husband's nearly bare torso. Quickly, she banished thoughts of Andrew. This moment belonged to her and her lover. They lay down on his king-size bed and shared a night filled with emotions and passion she had never known before. Sunday arrived too soon. They had spent most of the weekend ensconced in bed. Although it had been an exhilarating time, she felt ready to return home and reconcile with Andrew. Late that afternoon, they ordered Chinese takeout. After their meal, they made love one last time before she showered, packed, and changed back into the short black dress from Friday evening. Exiting through his garage, she slipped into her car and drove away, unnoticed by nosy neighbors. No one would suspect she had spent the weekend with Mark. At most, they might think she had been out with him on Friday night. Soon, Mark would move on to bigger opportunities in New York, and she would focus on starting a family with Andrew. She felt content with her life. 20 minutes later, Stella pulled her Audi into her driveway. The house appeared unusually dark. The porch lights were off, and Andrew's truck wasn't in sight. She assumed he had parked it in the garage. Entering through the side door, she expected Buster to greet her, but the dog was nowhere to be seen. "I'm home," she called out. Still, no Buster. She moved through the kitchen and into the living room, finding both empty. "Andrew, I'm home," she repeated. Silence. They must have gone for a late walk, she reasoned. Andrew must be in a down mood. He always walks Buster late when he's feeling low. She poured herself a glass of scotch, checked the nearly full bottle to see if Andrew had been drinking, and then settled onto the living room sofa, curling up in a comfortable corner. Though exhausted, she felt the need to stay awake for Andrew's return, ready to show him that nothing had changed, except perhaps that her love for him had deepened. From now on, she would treat him like the prince he was. Despite her resolve, exhaustion overcame her, and she fell asleep. The ringing of the front doorbell woke her. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. She must have slept through the night. As she reached the door, a sense of unease washed over her. Buster wasn't there, eagerly jumping up by the entrance. Where is Buster? Her sleepy mind wondered. Opening the door, she found a tall woman with her hair tightly pulled back and clad in a cheap, dark pantsuit. "Stella Johnson," the woman asked. "Yes, may I help you?" Stella replied. "Mrs. Andrew Johnson." "Yes, what is this about?" "I'm Detective Ellie Powell," the woman announced, flashing a gold badge. "May I come in? I need to ask you some questions." Stella instinctively stepped back to let the detective enter, but then it hit her. "Oh, no," Stella exclaimed. "Did something happen to Andrew?" Detective Powell walked into the living room, turned, and gave Stella a once-over. Stella was still in the short black dress she had worn the previous evening, making her feel exposed and embarrassed. "Not that I'm aware of," the detective replied. "I'm here about Mark Wilson." Mr. Wilson. What about him?" Stella felt increasingly exposed and confused, which seemed to be what the detective intended. "He was attacked last night while taking out his trash in front of his home," the detective explained, pulling a small notepad from her pocket. "He claims he was ambushed by a man wearing a ski mask and wielding a small club." "Oh my God, you're here because you suspect Andrew." "Actually, no," Detective Powell said, a slight irrepressible smile forming at the corners of her mouth. "Andrew Johnson has been eliminated as a suspect, despite our initial thoughts, mostly because Mr. Wilson was quick to tell us he had spent the weekend with you." Detective Powell's smile turned into a knowing smirk. Stella felt sick and sat down hard on the couch. The detective followed and settled into a wingback chair facing Stella. "You said my husband is not a suspect?" Stella asked, her voice trembling. "No. The manager and staff of the Albany Yacht Club say he launched his boat, the Amor, into the river yesterday afternoon and sailed south. Given the time of year, they chose to keep track of him via his VHF radio. They can place him on the Hudson near Poughkeepsie at the time of the attack. Boat? Stella asked, regaining some of her composure. He took his sailboat out on the river in January, she finished incredulously. Detective Powell referred to her notebook. Flipping a page, she said. A 38-foot Catalina, according to the yacht club manager. Apparently, he purchased it in December and has been preparing it for a while. They say he's fortunate there's so little ice on the river this winter. They believe he is headed south. Stella bolted up the stairs to the master bedroom. At first glance, everything seemed in place, but upon closer inspection, she realized some of Andrew's belongings were missing. His closet, filled mostly with work clothes, appeared nearly untouched, but his dresser drawers were almost empty. However, what caught her eye was an envelope resting on her dresser, containing a greeting card. The card's front read, "How can I tell you how sorry I am?" She barely glanced at the pre-printed poem inside, focusing instead on Andrew's handwritten note. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.